Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, whose real name was Marcus Annius Verus, was born on April 26, 121 AD, during the reign of Emperor Hadrian, to a noble family said to be descended from Numa, the second king of Rome. He was considered the most pious and most devout of the early kings. Marcus's father, Annius Verus, served as praetor, and his grandfather, also named Annius Verus, served as consul 3 times. Marcus's father died after he was a young child, so his grandfather sponsored him. Emperor Hadrian, r. 117–138 AD, admired Marcus's personality, saw in him genius and piety, and saw in him a genius. He liked to call him Verissimus, the truest, instead of Verus, the honest. Antoninus Pius married Marcus's aunt, Annia Galeria Faustina, and adopted Marcus, so his name became Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, named after his adoptive father Antoninus Pius, whose real name is Aurelius Antoninus, and the title Pius means pious, who ascended to the throne after Hadrian in 138 AD and Marcus. Then he was 17 years old. He married his daughter Faustina to him in 145 AD. When Antoninus Pius died in 161 AD, Marcus ascended to the throne of the empire. When he ascended the throne, he brought with him, against the wish of the Senate, his adopted brother Lucius Verus, whom Antoninus Pius also adopted as his youngest son with Marcus. Therefore, the empire had 2 rulers on the throne at the same time. No sooner had Marcus ascended the throne than troubles came upon him from all directions. In the east, the Parthians rebelled, destroying an entire Roman legion and attacking the entire country. Marcus sent them with his brother Verus at the head of an army to suppress this revolution. Verus, who indulged in drinking and debauchery, succeeds in his mission thanks to his army commanders. The wars of the east had hardly ended when powerful German tribes north of the Danube, the Marcomanni, the Cardi, the Sarmatians and the Carti, allied themselves to attack the northern borders of the empire and threaten Italy, Pannonia, and Greece. So Marcus and Verus marched towards them at the head of Roman divisions to secure the Danube front. In Rome itself, the plague, which moved from the east with the army of viruses, was killing people. The Tiber floods destroyed huge amounts of grain and caused a severe famine that forced Marcus to sell the royal jewels to confront the famine and meet urgent needs. In the year 169 AD, Verus suddenly died, and Marcus took sole control of the empire and remained in control for the rest of his life. He was able to achieve stability in the empire and conquer his enemies thanks to his military skill and wisdom in choosing the leaders of his armies. In the year 175 AD, Marcus was shocked by the betrayal of Avidius Cassius, the commander of his armies in Asia, who had won glory in the Parthian wars. He declared himself emperor of the Romans, thinking that Marcus, who was in ill health at the time, had died. Before Marcus arrived in Asia to confront this matter, Cassius was killed by some of his officers. When Marcus arrived in Asia, the head of Cassius was presented to him. He regretted his death and refused to meet his killers because they deprived him of the joy of turning an enemy into a friend. He showed amazing compassion for Cassius' family and supporters, and his letter to the Senate, in which he appealed to them to be kind to the perpetrators, still remains to this day attesting to the nobility and resourcefulness of this man, his chest and the serenity of his bed. During this trip to the east, his wife Faustina died, and he was deeply saddened by her death, and he remained faithful to her memory until the last day of his life. He soon resumed his wars on the northern front, crowned with victory. However, in his camp he contracted a fatal infection which was said to be the plague, and he died on March 17, 180, while advising his soldiers not to make him cry, but rather to resist the epidemic that was killing people. The day of his death was, in the words of Ernest Renan, an unfortunate day for philosophy and for civilization. He was succeeded by his son Commodus, the only surviving son of his at that time, and ruled Rome for 12 years. He was a weak and failed emperor. He spoiled many of his father's campaigns by concluding a hasty and ill-advised peace. He was a useless and violent tyrant. It may even be said that the only defect that diminishes Marcus Aurelius's position is that he fathered such a bloody, insignificant boy. Marcus's mistakes were not limited to his fathering Commodus. His inclusion of Verus, his adopted brother, in power was a major mistake that was covered by the forbearance of fate, the steadfastness of his officers, and his early death. However, this precedent set by Marcus wreaked havoc on the empire in the era of Diocletian and split the empire into two halves. Among Marcus's mistakes was his excessive centralization of civil administration, as well as his persecution of Christians, or, more precisely, his laxity in protecting them from persecution. As for the advantages of his rule, they are too numerous to count. He was a capable military leader, of humble build, and a prudent and conscientious administrator. Despite his practice of philosophy and his passion for it, he did not slip into trying to reshape the world according to any theoretical plan or preconception, which is a slippery slope into which any philosopher would easily fall who, like Marcus, could rule the world. Rather, he was content with following the path paved by his predecessors. He only aspires to perform his duty to the best of his ability and to resist corruption as much as possible. Marcus says, "Do not hope in Plato's utopian republic, but be content with the smallest step forward, and do not underestimate this achievement. How trivial are those miserable people who engage in political matters and think that their actions have a philosophical quality. They're all goofing off. Who can change their minds? Without a change of opinion, what is there but slavery? People moaning while pretending to be obedient? Go then, and tell me now about Alexander, Philip, and Demetrius of Philaria. I would have been worthy to follow them if they had seen what the nature of the world wanted and had been taught by it. But if they simply play the roles of drama heroes, then I am free from imitating them. The task of philosophy is simple and humble, so do not lead me to conceit and arrogance." In his administration, Marcus devoted himself to establishing justice, protecting states from injustice, helping afflicted cities, creating internal laws to protect the weak and relieve slaves, and caring for and educating weak children and orphans, making himself a father to those who lost a father and a shepherd to those who lost care. The pagan Roman religion of that era would not have enriched great souls very richly. Most of its myths are childish and repulsive, and most of its teachings have no close connection to morality. Roman religion, in truth and essence, was closer to a deal between man and the gods. People make certain sacrifices to the gods and perform formal rituals, in order for the gods to repay them with favor and blessings, whether they did good or bad, and regardless of their intentions and merit. Pious souls had no choice but to seek refuge in philosophy and seek spiritual tranquility and mental satisfaction. The two prevailing philosophies at that time were Epicureanism and Stoicism. Marcus Aurelius's Stoicism was moderate and modified. Marcus put forward some of the principles of Stoicism, while others were not overly exaggerated by the ancients. He avoided delving into logic and naturalism, and wrote down his personal thoughts in a simple manner, in most cases, in which he avoided mentioning technical terms and complex interpretations. Thus, he provided Stoicism with an easy-to-understand formula of a series, which was the last message sent by the ancient world to future generations. For this reason, he rejected the Stoics' claim of the possibility of certain knowledge, and took the view of their critics that the wise man who possesses certain knowledge does not exist. It is as if a veil had been cast over things so thick that they seem to quite a few of the great philosophers to be completely incomprehensible. Even to the Stoics themselves, facts seemed incomprehensible, and all rational assent to our perceptions seemed fallible. No one is infallible. Thus, he refused to place all sins in one rank. The ancient Stoics believed that virtue was a single, simple, indivisible whole, that you possessed all of it or possessed none of it. The same applies to vice. They rejected the idea of moral gradation, and they came to this with an impressive analogy. They said that a person is either virtuous or not virtuous, and he is not considered virtuous if he has not attained full virtue, just as a drowning person is no less drowned an inch away from the surface of the water than if he were at the bottom of the sea. Marcus says, It is worse to commit a sin out of desire than to commit it out of anger. It seems that the one who is aroused by anger is led away from reason by some pain and involuntary spasm, while the one who is driven by desire to sin and surrenders to pleasure appears to be more reckless in his sin and less manly. The first is like a person who was harmed, and the pain forced him to get angry, but the second is the source of his whims and the source of his impulse to sin when his desire prompted him to commit what he committed. Hence, you do not find in his words the tone of overconfidence and arrogance in opinion that you find in the sayings of the ancient Stoics. Marcus says to himself, "You do not have room to study and acquire, but you have room to stop arrogance, and you have room to rise above pleasure and pain, and you have room to rise above the love of fame, and not to be angry with the dull and ungrateful, but truly to care for them. Be careful not to shrink and not to become dyed with this dye. You may fall into this if you are not careful," including that, unlike the ancient Stoics, he adopted Plato's idea of social and political duty. Since man is a social being, it is our duty to play our role in public political affairs. Marcus says, "I wake up from my sleep to do my job as a human being. Do I still hate to go and do what I was created to do and what I came into the world to do?" Marcus Aurelius was destined to be a philosopher emperor Raxuam. He did not for a moment avoid the company of philosophy, nor did he neglect the duties of king and military leader. He was able to alleviate this apparent tension between the responsibilities of the ruler and the responsibilities of the philosopher, and he was convinced that virtue can find a way out of shortcomings, and that the practice of philosophy can alleviate the harshness of the ruler and make him more acceptable and have a better position in the hearts. May philosophy be for you a permanent refuge, a resting place, and a habitat, until you make the palace seem tolerable to you, and so that you seem tolerable in the palace. The truth is that the military job was not consistent with the spirit of the philosopher Marcus Aurelius, despite his mastery of this job. This emerges from his speech from time to time. A spider is proud when she catches a fly, and a human being is proud of his catch. Poor rabbit, a little fish in a net, pigs, bears, captives from the Sarmatians, and everyone, by motive, is thieves. Perhaps the most important thing about Marcus is his therapeutic prescription for returning to oneself and retreating to oneself from time to time in search of safety and tranquility, as it is an impregnable inner fortress. It is a mental resort where true relaxation and constant renewal. It is the fortress that Marcus used to seek refuge in during his northern campaigns beyond the Danube, and one that Marcus calls on us to search for something like it within ourselves. They are looking for resorts for themselves, Marcus says, in the countryside, by the sea, on the hills, and you are particularly vulnerable to this passionate desire. But this is a characteristic of the oppressors, so whenever you want a refuge, you can still seek it within yourself, which is between you. There is no place in the world that is quieter or farther away from turmoil than what a person finds when he is alone with himself, especially if his soul is rich in thoughts that, if they shade him, fill him with complete and immediate tranquility. By tranquility, I only mean a life governed by the mind and well led. Always give yourself this rest and renew yourself. Let the rational principles to which you will return there be brief, basic, and sufficient to take away all your pain immediately and return you to your resumed affairs, free of dissatisfaction with them or dissatisfaction with them. Remember that your directing mind is invincible if it sticks to itself and is self-sufficient, not doing anything that it does not want to do, even if its position is merely stubbornness, let alone if the judgment it forms is supported by reason and deliberation. Therefore, a mind devoid of emotions is a castle. There is no refuge for people stronger than this, and whoever takes refuge in it is in a strong fortress. How ignorant is he who does not see this castle, and how miserable is he who does not seek refuge in this fortress. Marcus took the Socratic idea that virtue is science and vice is ignorance, and that no one commits evil intentionally, that is, knowingly. It follows, logically, that we must educate him and enlighten him about his ignorance towards the one who committed the mistake. Otherwise, we should tolerate him and not blame him for our own failure and negligence in guiding him to the right path. No soul would deliberately want to be deprived of truth, and the same applies to justice, temperance, charity, and all these virtues. It is very important that you always keep this in mind, as you will be kinder to everyone. Each of them was afflicted with this because of his ignorance of what is good and what is evil, but I, who saw the nature of good, and knew that it is beautiful, and the nature of evil, and knew that it is ugly, and realized that the one who commits vices, he is not the slightest different from me in his very nature. We are united not only by blood and race, but also by kinship with the same mind and the same divine touch. But as for me, now that I have seen this kinship, none of these people will harm me, and he will not harm me with his sins. And it is not for me to take revenge on him for my kinship, or be angry with him. Ask yourself what this is. What's wrong with me now? What kind of virtues do I need to confront him? Kindness, for example, or courage, or honesty. This came from one of my fellow human beings, my relative and colleague, even if he did not know what was appropriate to his own nature. However, I know, then I treat him gently and justly, following the natural law of brotherhood. It is practically useful to be aware of this whenever you encounter it. It is the virtue that nature has given us so that we can confront every malicious act. You gave us kindness as an antidote to cruelty and other qualities with which we can confront other abuses. In general, you can always re-educate those who have lost their way, and whoever does evil has missed his true goal and lost his way. It is human nature to love even those who slip and fall. This becomes clear if you take into consideration, when they make mistakes, that human beings are brothers, and that they make mistakes out of ignorance and not intentionally, and that death will soon overtake you and overtake them. Most importantly, the mistake did not harm you, and did not make your guiding mind in a worse position than it was before. If you can, show them the right path, and if you cannot, remember that for this reason you have been given the faculty of tolerance. Marcus took from Heraclitus the idea of the perpetual change of everything. Existence is change and becoming, and nothing remains as it is, O God, except change itself. Heraclitus says, "You cannot go down the same river twice, because new waters flow upon you without ceasing." Marcus says that change is nature's way of working. The nature of the world is busy with this work, to transform one reality into another, to change things, to take them from here and put them there. All things change. Change is not a characteristic of things, but rather a way of existence. Time is like a river of current events and a violent current. Barely does anything appear to the eye before it drifts away into the past, and something else takes its place, and soon it also drifts away. Consider all that change brings, and reconcile yourself to the idea that the nature of the all is not so fond of changing every form of existence into another, similar but new. The order of things is preserved by the changes that occur in the elements, just as it is preserved by the changes that occur in the things that are composed of these elements. Is anyone afraid of change? Well, anything can happen without change. Or is there anything dearer and closer to the nature of the whole than change? Can you yourself take a bath if the wood of the stove has not been changed? Can you eat without changing what you eat? Can anything useful be achieved in life without change? Do you not see, then, that change is to you the same thing and equally necessary to the nature of the whole? Change preserves the order of things and keeps the world always young, and the nature of the world, which, through the constant change of its constituent parts, keeps the whole world young and young. Some things encourage stepping into existence, some induce stepping out of it, and some generate perdition from the first place. Change always renews the world, just as the constant movement of time renews the duration of the ages forever. In this rushing stream, where there is no footing, what can one take away from all that rushes before him? It was as if he had hardly noticed a bird flying in front of him until it had disappeared from his sight. Marcus Aurelius was not passionate about logic and naturalism, but he recommended their study in view of the close connection between man and the universe, between microcosm and macrocosm. He who does not know what the world is does not know where it is, and he who does not know for what purpose the world existed does not know who he is or what the world is, and he who does not know any of these cannot even say why he himself came into being. So what do you think of that man, who avoids or seeks praise from people who do not know where they are or who they are? Always keep these things in mind. What is the nature of the whole? What is my own nature? What does this nature have to do with that? What kind of part is what kind of whole? And that no one can prevent you from saying what you say and doing what you do in accordance with that nature of which you are a part. Nothing leads you to a sublime mind like your ability to expose every element of your life experience to systematic and honest examination, and your ability to always look at things so that you can at the same time contemplate what kind of world this is and what role it is contributing to it. Or that in this world, and what value does everything have in relation to the whole and in relation to the human? Who is the citizen of this highest city in which all other cities are merely families? Marcus believed that the entire world is nothing but one living organism with interconnected members and interconnected parts. What happens in the part affects the whole and vice versa, and that God and nature are one thing. Pantheism, pantheism. Always look at the world as one living organism, consisting of one matter and one spirit. See how everything dissolves in this one consciousness, how all its actions are subject to one tendency, how all things cooperate in everything that happens. See also the constant spinning of the thread of the web and its weaving. There is one light of the sun, even if it is dispersed on walls, mountains, and countless other things. There is one general substance, even if it is broken down into countless bodies, each of which has its own form and characteristics. There is one animal soul, even if it is distributed among countless species and individuals, and one rational soul. Even if they appear divided, all things are intertwined, bound together by a sacred bond. Nothing is alien to other things. They are all arranged together to cooperate in bringing about the one order of the world. This is because the world composed of all things is one, the God emanating in all things is one, matter is one, the law is one, the mind common to all rational beings is one, and truth is one. Because truth is the perfection of rational beings participating in one mind. Consider carefully the interconnectedness and kinship of all things in the world. All things, in a way, are interconnected and therefore have friendly feelings toward each other. Thing follows thing in a disciplined order, through the tension of movement, the comprehensive spirit that inspires it, and the unity of all existence. All things, despite their separation and distinction, permeate one another and respond to one another. In chains of things, the succeeding is always connected with what came before, not a simple enumeration of separate things and a mere necessary succession, but a rational connection. Just as existing things are harmoniously interconnected, so the processes of becoming display not a mere succession, but a profound and astonishing harmony. The Stoics believe that the essence of the world is the universal mind, or logos, and that this mind is spread throughout everything and everywhere. Marcus says, "Do not breathe only from the surrounding air, but also take your thought from the mind that includes all things. The rational force is spread everywhere, like air, and permeates everything, at the will of whoever wishes to imbibe it, just as air is whoever is able to breathe it. For the universal economy, Marcus believes that every part of nature is necessary for it, harmonious with the whole and complementary to it. Even the waste and waste of nature are acceptable and reasonable things in the overall context, their cycle repeated within the self-sufficient whole. And do not ask why such things were made in the world. This is a funny question for the student of nature, just as a carpenter or cobbler laughs at you if he sees you upset at the sight of peeling scraps or scraps left over from their work on the floor of the workshop. However, these two have somewhere to throw their waste, but the nature of the all has nothing outside of itself. What is amazing about her art is that she has defined its limits, and everything that spoils inside it grows old or is no longer of use. It repeats its cycle inside it and creates other new things from this same material, so that it does not need material from the outside or a place in which to throw its waste. It is thus complete and satisfied with its place and its material and its art. All things come from there, from that all-ruling mind, either directly or as a result. So even the lion's open jaws, even poison, and every harmful thing, like thorns, like mud, are after products of the noble and the beautiful. Do not consider it alien to what you sanctify, but consider and do justice to the source of all things. Even the accidental products of what is done according to nature are not without charm and attraction. When a loaf is baked, for example, cracks are bound to occur here and there against what the baker intended. However, these unintentional cracks somehow attract the eye and stimulate the appetite. Figs also split when fully ripe. In the case of olives that ripen on their tree, the proximity of decomposition gives their fruit a certain elegance. Likewise, the ears of wheat bending to the ground, the lion's wrinkled eyelids, the foam flowing from the pig's mouth, and many other things are far from beautiful when taken individually, but their arrangement in the processes of nature gives them beauty and attractiveness. Hence, any person who has a deep feeling and insight into the workings of the all will find some pleasure in almost every aspect of it, including the accidental products of everything in nature. Then his role in the plot of the all, and every person has his job, even the sleeper and even the saboteur. Even sleepers are workers involved in making what happens in the world. Each one has his own assigned job, and there is a job even for the opponent who wants to spoil production. The world needs him too. Nature uses the material of the world just as wax is used. Sometimes she creates it in the form of a horse, then melts it and uses its material to create a tree, then a human, then something else. Everything only lasts a little. It is not difficult for a vessel to collapse, just as it was not difficult for it to be leveled before by a vessel. Other things will be created from this matter, and then other things from this, and so on, so that the world will always remain a boy. Belief in the cosmos, one organized universe, leads to belief in providence and rejection of the theory of the meeting of atoms by chance, as stated by Epicureanism. In Marcus's time, Epicureanism was the philosophy competing with Stoicism for the hearts of the Roman youth. Hence, he often sets its nature, atoms, as a contrast to the Stoic nature, the ordered universe, providence, and imposes on himself the choice. Or do you see yourself dissatisfied with the share in all that has been allocated to you? Then remember that you have to choose, either providential providence or blind atoms that meet at will and separate. However, in some passages, he draws the same moral conclusions from both Stoic and Epicurean premises, so he begins the analogy with the phrase, whether the matter is atoms or providence. Hence, it allows the agnostic in the field of physics to be a Stoic in the field of ethics. The universe does not fall into two states, either chaos, disorder, and dispersion, into atoms, or it is unity, order, and providence. If the first assumption is true, why would I want to stay in a randomly constructed world that suffers from such confusion? Why should I concern myself with anything other than turning dust into dust? Why do I feel disturbed? So the scattering will happen to me no matter what I do. If the second assumption is true, I will pay my respects, standing firm and unshakable, relying on the one in whose hand is the management of all matters, as good and evil, such as money, prestige, health, illness, life, death, fame, inactivity, pleasure and pain, etc. They are things that are equal or indifferentia, that is, they cannot in themselves affect the directing mind or the internal state of a person. Therefore, it is neither good nor evil in itself. Death and life, idleness and idleness, pain and pleasure, wealth and poverty. These things in themselves are neither good nor bad. Therefore, it is neither good nor evil in itself. Be beautiful with simplicity, humility, and indifference to what is neither good nor evil. Live life in the best way possible. The soul can do this if it is indifferent to insignificant things. You would be indifferent to these things if you looked at them as a whole and each separately, and remembered that none of these things passes judgment on itself or imposes itself on us. Attributing value to these indifferent things is not just an error in judgment, but it has devastating practical consequences. If you regard as good or evil those things beyond your control, it will necessarily follow that you will murmur against the gods and hate men whenever this evil befalls you or whenever you lose that good. We would be doing a great injustice by considering these things as different. But if we limit the character of good and evil to what falls within our ability, there will no longer be justification for accusing a god or for taking a hostile stance toward a human being. The true value is to do or abstain according to your true nature. And if you grasp this value, you will not aspire to acquire anything else, nor will you exalt the value of many other things besides it. Otherwise, you will not be free, self-sufficient, or devoid of emotion, and you will be forced into the flesh, jealous and anxious about those who have the power to rob you of these things, and plotting against those who have what you deem valuable. In short, anyone who feels the need for any of these things will necessarily have a miserable life and will often be tempted to complain to the gods. Hence, one should strive for preferred things, preferables. That is, the non-differentiating things that are appropriate for a person from the beginning of his opinion, with reservation and without excessive eagerness, so that we do not let the shock of failure affect our happiness and contentment. Seek what suits you. But be careful not to let enjoying it make you addicted to it and dependent on it, so that you do not become miserable if you lose it one day. And remember that you were trying with caution. You didn't want to do the impossible, so what did you want? An effort bound by a condition, and you have achieved this. Without arrogance, accept prosperity when it comes, and be prepared to lose it when it goes. The idea of caution in pursuing goals is related to another idea, related to dealing with difficulties. If goodness is rational, virtuous behavior, then what if we encounter obstacles and obstacles stand in our way? Marcus simply answers, nothing. That would be another opportunity to practice virtue. The mind has the ability, by its nature and by its will, to go through every obstacle. In all other organic beings, any harm done to any of them makes them worse in themselves, but in the case of human beings, a person actually becomes better and more worthy of praise if he makes right use of the circumstances that come his way. If someone forcefully obstructs your path, use calmness as an excuse and turn the obstacle into practicing another type of virtue. Have you ever encountered an obstacle in your pursuit of something? If your pursuit were truly unconditional, this obstacle would certainly be harmful to you as a rational being. But if you accept the usual course of things, there is no longer any harm or hindrance. You see, no one but you will hinder the right functions of the mind. Neither people, nor iron, nor tyranny, nor insults can touch the mind. Since the mind has become a complete circle, it is still a complete circle in its unity. That ruling power within us, wherever it is in harmony with nature, takes a flexible attitude to circumstances and always adapts itself easily and conveniently to the events which present itself to it. It does not require a specific material for its operation, but rather goes towards its purpose in an adaptive manner, transforming any obstacle in its path into material for its use. It is like a fire that controls anything that falls within it. The slender embers may then be extinguished, but the burning fire possesses the material on which it is piled, devours it, and descends on top of it, thanks to this same material. These things may hinder me from some of my activities, yes, but they do not constitute obstacles to my sentiments and impulses, since in them reside the conditional commitment and the power of adaptation. The mind adapts and revolves around any obstacle to action in order to serve its goal. It turns what is an obstacle to a specific action into an aid to that action, and turns an obstacle on a certain path into progress on that path. So wherever an obstacle stands in your way, accept the obstacle as it is, and divert your efforts wisely to confront the existing circumstance, and soon a new action will replace the previous one, appropriate to this new situation that we are talking about. In this mental deliberation, there is no deviation or deviation from the mind's path. The arrow moves in one way and the mind moves in another way, and yet the mind, even when it exercises caution or revolves around a certain investigation, moves with the same straightness and moves forward on its way. This is because the mind itself is in a strong fortress. It is isolated and protected from external things. As soon as it entertains itself and discovers its powers, it separates itself from the fluctuations of the body. External things have no power over the mind. It is there, inert and neutral, with no harm or guidance for the mind. Marcus says, "The same things cannot touch the soul in the slightest. Things have no access to the soul and cannot direct or move the soul. Rather, the soul manages itself and moves itself and establishes for itself what it deems appropriate judgments regarding the things that come before it. The external things that you seek or avoid do not impose themselves on you, but you are, in a sense, the one who comes out to them. Let your judgment of her calm down, and she will calm down in turn and will no longer see you seeking her or avoiding her. Things stand outside us, standing on their own, knowing nothing about themselves and revealing nothing. So what does it indicate? Our guiding mind. The directing and ruling part of yourself must remain immune from whatever course runs through the body. Now, one of the unique characteristics of the mind is that it isolates itself and is not affected by the activity of the senses or the activity of desires. These two activities are animal, while the goal of mental activity is to master them and not hand over its leadership to them, because his very nature is to place all these things under his command. The directing mind is that which awakens itself, gives itself the nature it desires, and makes everything that happens to it appear as it desires. If the body suffers, then that is its business, but the soul can preserve its qualities and tranquility and not evaluate pain as evil, because every opinion, movement, desire, and aversion is within, where no evil can reach. The directing mind does not care about itself. He does not terrify her, nor does he drive her to desire. Let him terrify her as he pleases or hurt her, for by himself and by his own judgment he did not intend to pay attention to such situations. Let the body be careful to avoid pain as much as possible, and let the sensitive soul say, "I am afraid or in pain." But the mind that makes a general assessment of all these things will not suffer at all. He will not throw himself into any of these judgments. The directing mind itself has no need unless it creates the need itself. Hence, he is not harmed or hindered as long as he does not harm himself or hinder himself. And even if the flood sweeps you away, let it take your wretched body and your scanty breath and everything else, but your mind will not take it. And the mind, by elevating itself, maintains its tranquility. The directing mind is not hindered by pain, and the parts affected by pain can see in it what they see. It follows from the above that there is no real harm that can befall a person except what the mind inflicts on itself, and that is when it makes a mistake in its judgments. There is no harm except self-harm. Did anyone hurt you, but he harmed himself? There is no harm to you that resides in someone else's mind, not even in any change in your physical giving. Where then lies the harm? The part of you that forms judgments about harm. Stop judging that there is harm in you that you are free from. Even if the closest thing to it, which is your body, was exposed to a knife or cauterization, or was left to fester or die, the queen who rules these rulings should remain calm. The soul only harms itself when it becomes a separate entity, similar to a tumor on the body of the world. Dissatisfaction with anything that decrees fate is a separating rebellion from nature. And when you distance yourself from another human being, or when quarreling enters into it, you intend to harm it. This is the state of souls that are overwhelmed by anger, and when they surrender to pleasure or pain, and when they pretend and show off, and do or say things that are not truthful or true, and when they lose their goal and get confused randomly. An action, no matter how small, should be performed for a purpose and aimed at a goal. The goal of rational beings is to follow reason and abide by the law of the most ancient state and government. The world a person harms himself when he makes his happiness dependent on others' opinions of him and their talk about him, and then he wants to get it begging and pleading. He is a beggar if he relies on others and does not store within himself everything he needs in life. Happiness depends on self-esteem for itself, and you still deprive it of that and pin your happiness on others, their selves, their opinions, and their assessments. What is the use of praise? It is as if you are rejecting the gift of nature that I entrusted you with, which does not depend on the words of others, and clinging to something else. Everything that is beautiful in any way is beautiful in itself. Its beauty is stored in its core, and praise is not a part of it. Praise does not make something better or worse than it is. Do not look around to delve into the minds of others, but rather look in front of you at what nature leads you to. How happy is the one who does not look at what his neighbors say, what they do, or what they think, but rather turns to his own actions to make them just, dignified, and imbued with goodness. How do you understand your own good? The lover of fame places his good in the responses of others, and the lover of pleasure places his good in his negative experience. As for the wise man, he sees his goodness as his own actions. Everything that befalls man is destined for him from eternity, and is good for him because it is appropriate for the nature of the world, and good for him because it is good for all, and one must be content with his lot and accept his destiny, because it is good for him on the one hand, and because there is no escape from it on the other hand. Has something happened to you? Well, everything that happened to you was destined for you by everyone from the beginning and woven for you. You only love what happened to you and was woven for you from the thread of your destiny. What could be more appropriate for you than this? Seneca says, "Fate drives the wise and drags down the fools." Marcus says, "Voluntarily surrender yourself to Clotho, one of the goddesses of fate, and let her spin your thread in any way she wishes." A person who is dissatisfied with everything and dissatisfied with everything is like a sacrificial pig, kicking and screaming. This pig is also the person who silently laments in his room all the chains that bind us. Only a rational person would be inspired to voluntarily choose to surrender to what is happening. However, pure surrender is a necessity imposed on all of us. Just as we all say that the doctor has prescribed this for horse riding, for this cold baths, for this to walk barefoot. In the same sense, we can say that the nature of the whole has prescribed this person's illness, disability, or any other of these afflictions. In the first case, the word description means something like this, that the doctor has recommended this procedure for this person to bring him health. In the second case, it means that what happens to each person is planned in some way to lead to his fate. We talk about the appropriateness of these events just as builders talk about the appropriateness of stone blocks in walls or pyramids when they are aligned with each other in a certain position. This is because in the totality of things there is one harmony, and just as all material bodies unite to make the world one body, a harmonious whole, so all causes unite to make fate one harmonious cause. This is something that even the least knowledgeable people understand. Fate made him do this, they say. If fate was created, then it was also described. Let us accept these prescriptions as we accept a doctor's prescriptions. It is often harsh, but we accept it for healing. When the Stoic sage is trained, rationality becomes a mental habit in him, virtues become second nature, and his rational principles become inherent to him and do not depart from him. Because it is part of him, in applying your principles, be like a boxer, not a fencer or a gladiator. The gladiator is dependent on the sword he uses. He raises it, or it falls from it, and he is killed. As for the boxer, he always has his hand, and he only has to use it. Just as doctors are always ready with their instruments and scalpels to treat any emergency, so your rational principles should be ready to understand matters divine and human, and to perform every action, however insignificant, with awareness of the bond that binds the divine and the human. It will not be possible for you to be good at any work related to man without also having a reference to divine matters, and vice versa. Wisdom is application, practice, and habituation as much as it is theorizing, attaining, and contemplating, and the soul is not stained by thoughts until it becomes in them an innate, created, and essence. Likewise, when goodness becomes a person's nature and character, it comes to him spontaneously, without affectation or effort. It exudes goodness just as a vessel exudes what is in it, or just as a being performs its natural function without initiating it and hardly being aware of it. Some people, if they give someone a favor, quickly register it in their account as a debt owed. Some of them do not rush to do so, but they harbor within themselves that this person is indebted to him and is well aware of what he has done. There is a third type that, in a sense, is not aware of what has come to it and does not mobilize its mind for it. Rather, it is like a vine that has given away its bunches and does not expect any return. The horse has completed the race, the dog has chased, the bee has emptied its honey, and the human being has done a favor. None of these people notice what he has done and do not seek witnesses to it. Rather, he goes on to a new action just as the vine goes on, to produce new clusters in the new season. Be one of those who do good deeds without noticing them. The wise man, with his social sense and his unity with his fellow human beings, does goodness out of justice and righteousness for himself before anything else. Otherwise, you no longer love your fellow human beings from your heart, and your doing good does not please you as an end in itself. You are still doing righteousness as an etiquette and a duty, and not as righteousness yourself. As long as you did good and another received it, why do you still wait, like an idiot, for a third thing? Side of these two: to gain fame for doing good or receive compensation. Did I do something for the greater good? So I got paid. May this always be your conviction and never stop doing good. The mistake is yours if you have done a favor without making this favor an end in itself and making your action its own reward that does not lack any other reward. What else do you, O human, want from doing the favor? Is it not enough that you have done something in harmony with your own nature? Do you now want to put a price on him? It is as if the eye is asking for something in return for seeing, or the foot for walking. Just as these two were created for a specific purpose and achieve their right nature by acting according to their own nature, so man was created to do good, and whenever he does good or contributes to the common good, he has done what he was created for and obtained what is his. Marcus argues that in reality only one has the present moment, because everything else is either a past gone or an unknown and unguaranteed future. It follows that one can only lose this moment in one's hand because he has nothing else to lose. When you are distressed in any circumstance, you have forgotten that each of us only lives in the present moment and only loses it. This entails many things that we should pay attention to. The first is that we must not procrastinate goodness, and we must focus on the present moment and not disturb it with ghosts of past scenes, nor with concerns about things that will come and not come. Pay attention to the issue in front of you, whether it is an opinion, an action, or a word. You deserve what you are because you chose to be good tomorrow, not to be good today. It follows from this that fame, glory, and immortality are illusions that do not exist. Remember that each of us only lives in the present moment and how insignificant it is in time, and that everything else in life is either an unreturnable past or an unknown future. It follows from this that the burden of the present moment is the only burden that we should bear, and we should not burden it with anything that is not of it. Do not trouble yourself with contemplating the whole scene of your life. Do not let your mind include at the same time all that troubled you in the past and all that may trouble you hereafter. Rather, ask yourself in every present circumstance, is there anything in this that is beyond my tolerance and is distressing me? You would be ashamed of such an admission. Then remind yourself that it is neither the future nor the past that is weighing on you, but only the present. How much less the burden of the present would be if you could only define it and reduce it to its size, and rebuke your mind if it fails to withstand something so light. It also follows from this that the length of life does not matter as long as we have only the present small moment and nothing to lose except it. Even if you are destined to live 3,000 years, or 10 times that, always remember that no one loses any life other than the one he lives, or live any life other than the one he loses. It follows that the longest and shortest lives are the same. The present moment is the same for everyone. Therefore, what passes is also equal. It becomes clear, then, that loss is only the loss of a moment and nothing more. This is because one cannot lose the past nor the future. How can he take away what he does not have? So remember these two things. All things are as they are from eternity, beginning and returning, and it is the same for a person to see the same scene for 100 years, 200 years, or an infinity of years. And what is taken away from a long-lived person is what is taken away from a short-lived person. There is nothing other than the present moment that can be taken away from a person. If it is true that this moment is all he has, then it is not possible for him to lose what he does not have. Therefore, a person should get rid of the obsession with clinging to life, as if extending the lifespan for a year or years could make any difference. It is as if a god told you that you would die tomorrow or the day after tomorrow at most, and you did not attach importance to the difference of a single day. Likewise, you should not imagine any significant difference between dying after many years and dying tomorrow. Go through in your mind a list of those who cling to life for a long time. What did they gain from that more than what did those who died early? Surely they are all now lying in their graves. Look at the horror of the gap of the past behind you and the other infinity before you. From this perspective, what is the difference between an infant who lived for 3 days and Nestorius who lived for 3 generations? Everything you see will soon pass away, and those who witness its passing will themselves pass away. Die at the most miserable age, or die before your time of death. Both are the same. No activity is harmed by it being stopped as long as it is stopped at the appropriate time, and it is not harmed by its doer that this particular activity is halted. Therefore, if the series of actions that constitute his life reach its end at the appropriate time, there is no harm to them from merely stopping, and there is no harm to the one who completed this series of actions at the appropriate time. As for time and term, they are determined by nature. The nature of man sometimes, as in old age, and the nature of the world at all times, which by the perpetual change of its constituent parts keeps the whole world young and young. Everything that benefits the world is good and within its time. So it is absolutely okay for each of us to end our lives. The end is neither a defect nor a choice, nor is it against the common good, but rather it is good. It falls at the appropriate time, for everyone is in their interest and is in harmony with them. In the same way, a person walks with the help of the Lord if he goes by choice and direction on the path of the Lord. Take your turn in the yard and do not be let down. Die freely, at the very least. Many grains of incense on the same altar, one falls first, the other later. It makes no difference. Just like in the stadium and places like that, Marcus says. Where the stability of the scenery and the monotony of the scene create boredom, this is also the case with your experience of life as a whole. Everything, here and there, is the same thing, for the same reasons. So, for how long? Look back at the past, to all the extreme changes of the ruling families, and then you can also predict what will be. It is certain that it will be exactly like that, and that it cannot deviate from the rhythm of the present. Therefore, it is the same to contemplate human life for 40 years and to contemplate it for 10,000 years. What new thing can you see? Consider, for example, the time of Vespasian, and you will see the same things. People marry, have children, become ill, die, fight, restore, trade, cultivate the land, flatter, argue, doubt and conspire, wish for the death of others, complain about their allotted share, fall in love, hoard money, long for the position of consul and king, and now their lives passed and disappeared. Then go back to the time of Trajan, and you will also see the same things, and life also passed. Look also at other times, and indeed all nations, and you will see many lives of toil ending in a rapid fall and dissolution into the elements. Everything that happens is usual and familiar, like flowers in spring and fruit in summer. So also sickness and death, slander and conspiracy, and everything that pleases or pains fools. And wherever you turn, you will find the same things that abound in the history of the ages, ancient, medieval, and modern, and that abound in cities and homes today. Nothing new. Everything is familiar, known, and fleeting. What is death? Whoever contemplates death in itself and performs a rational analysis of it to strip it of the connotations associated with it will conclude that it is nothing more than a natural function. Whoever is afraid of a function of nature is a bad child. Death is not only a natural function, but it is also for the good and good of nature. Marcus believes that there is no point in fearing death in any case. You, human being, were born, grew up, and experienced all the funny things that life has to offer. So leave now, for if it is for another life, then even this shore will not be devoid of gods, and if there is no life or sense, then you will no longer suffer pains and pleasures, and you will no longer be enslaved to a bodily vessel whose master is as lowly as his servant is very high. This is a mind and a soul, and that is just dust and blood. Whoever fears death fears the loss of senses, or fears a sense of another kind. If you lose sensation, you will also not feel any harm. But if you gain a different feeling, you will be a different being, and life will not stop. Death is a natural function in which there is no shame, and a natural act that one should perform with perfection like any other act. As long as you do your duty, you don't care whether you are cold or warm, sleepy or awake, whether people praise you or blame you, whether you are dying or doing something else. Even this, the act of dying, is one of the acts of life. It also suffices for you to master what you do to the best of your ability. Death, like birth, is a mystery of nature, a coalescence, then dissolution, of the same elements. There is certainly no shame in the matter. There is nothing in it that contradicts the nature of a rational being or contradicts the principle of its formation. Why does a person fear death as if he has never experienced it before and seen examples of it in his past life? Death is a change of stages, and stages and phases have changed for you before. So was there any reason for fear in that? The end of a job, the cessation of an activity or a rule, this is a kind of death, but there is no harm in it. Now turn to the phases of your life. Childhood, for example, then adolescence, youth, and old age. Here too every change is death, the stage. Is there anything scary? Now turn to your life with your grandfather, then with your mother, then with your father. Where you find many other examples of dissolution, change, or completion, ask yourself, was there anything to be afraid of? Likewise, there is nothing scary about ending, stopping, and changing your entire life. Marcus says, your encounter with death will be easier if you look at the things from which it will relieve you and the personalities that will no longer trouble your soul. Death is liberation from any response to the senses, from the strings of the puppets of desire, from the analytical mind, and from the service of the flesh. Look at what trouble we endure in this distance, between birth and death, what company we are surrounded with, and with what kind of people, and in what frail bodies we traverse with great effort. Isn't it enough that death relieves you of the boredom of monotony and repetition? Everything here and there is the same thing, and for the same reasons, so for how long? You must then spend this small fraction of time in harmony with nature, and leave it satisfied, just as an olive falls when it is ripe, blessing the earth that bore it, and giving thanks to the tree that gave it growth. There is a difficulty one finds among all the Stoics in reconciling determinism with freedom of will. Human beings are made for each other, Marcus says, when he thinks about his duty as a ruler. He says in the same description, the evil one does not harm others. When he considers the doctrine that only the virtuous will is good, he never infers that the good of one human being does not bring good to others, and that Marcus would not have harmed anyone but himself if he had been a bad emperor like Nero, although this conclusion seems to follow from his premises. Marcus says, "It is human nature to love even those who slip and fall." This becomes clear if you take into consideration, when they make mistakes, that human beings are brothers, and that they make mistakes out of ignorance and not intentionally, and that death will soon surround you and them. Most importantly, the wrongdoer did not harm you, and it has not made your directing mine any worse off than it was before. He says, "Love the human race, follow God, and it is enough to remember that the law governs all." These passages reveal very clearly the profound contradictions in Stoic ethics and theology. The world is a completely deterministic whole, such that everything that happens is a cause of previous causes. At the same time, the individual will is completely independent, and no one can be forced to sin by external reasons. This is a contradiction. There is another closely related contradiction. Since the will is independent, and the good will alone is good, it is not possible for anyone to cause good or harm to others. Charity is therefore an illusion. As for the immunity and immunity that the Stoic mind enjoys, it is not harmed or hindered unless it harms itself or hinders itself. It can maintain its tranquility and not evaluate pain as evil, and the affected body must see the matter as it sees it. This mental invulnerability or immunity is something that contradicts the empirical facts. The slightest physical disorder, such as indigestion, is enough to lead to a bad mood and affect a person's virtue. There are tons of torture that lead to the collapse of any person's resolve. Likewise, drugs, such as opium or cocaine, can break the will of any person, bend him, and weaken his resolve. The will is not independent of the tyrant unless the tyrant is not familiar with science. It seems that the will, good and evil, is subject to causes and influenced by factors, and is not independent to the extent that Marcus and the Stoics imagined. There is another contradiction. While the Stoic calls for goodness to others, he believes, theoretically, that no one can do good or evil to others, as long as the virtuous will alone is good, and as long as the good will is independent of external causes. It is a very clear contradiction, so how did the Stoics ignore it? They ignored it because they have two types of morals. Higher morality belongs to the Stoics, and lower morality belongs to the oppressors. When Marcus the Stoic thinks about himself, he believes that worldly goods are indifferent, and preoccupation with them may harm a person and make him rebel against the will of the whole. However, on the practical level, where he managed the Roman Empire, he knew very well that this theoretical thought would not help. It is his duty to see that shipments of grain from Africa arrive at Rome in time, that measures are taken to mitigate the ravages of plague, and that barbarous enemies should not be allowed to penetrate the frontiers. That is, in relation to his subjects, whom he does not consider to be Stoic philosophers, he submits to the usual earthly standards of what is good or evil. He applies these minimum standards in order to perform his duty as a ruler, and the contradiction here is that this same duty is what the Stoic sage must abide by, even though it is derived from an ethical system that the Stoic sage considers to be fundamentally wrong.